Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Marketing Table Talk, where industry experts share their view on how your brand can stand out and thrive in the marketplace. If we haven't met yet, I'm Lisa Perry. I'm a global marketing executive and the host of Marketing Table Talk. Today, we're going to talk about buzzwords, how to craft a compelling brand story that engages and converts. I am super excited to introduce my guest, colleague, and dear friend, John Gamades. He is the partner of OrangeBall Creative, the host of Grit Meets Growth, a podcast, love that name, and the curator of Depth Not Width blog. He has a passion for unleashing the power within, and John and his creative agency specializes in finding your brand voice, crafting that compelling brand story, and simplifying marketing that drives growth. Welcome to the show, John.
Hey, thank you. It's good to be here with you. And you and I have worked together what seems like a long time ago, but this is awesome to reconnect and have this conversation.
Well, before we dive in, for all of you out there, please, if you have a question for John, pop it in the chat because this is a hot topic and we want to get to that. And even more so, share your thoughts and perspectives. We would love to hear that along the way. And so without further ado, let's dive in. I love to explore why this is such a significant topic at this point in time. John, can you share your perspective on why crafting a compelling brand story is so crucial for businesses right now?
Absolutely. One of the things that we've seen, and this will resonate with a lot of people, go back 3 or 4 years and where your business was very different than where it is today. So what's happened is our businesses have changed. The pandemic happened. A lot of things have shifted in the marketplace. One of the things that we left behind and we didn't touch was our brand message in a lot of instances. Some brands have been better at this than others, obviously, but for a lot of brands, as they've made pivots in their business, their brand message didn't pivot with them. And you add to that some of the challenges that are out there right now. Brands spend a lot of time thinking about how they're going to talk to their customers. And I think one of the things that's happened again over the last 3 years is as recruiting and retention has become more challenging for brands have realized that their staff is a whole other customer persona that they need to be talking to. And so we've got a lot of clients in the last 2 years who have come to us and said, hey, we really want to work on attracting and recruiting talent to our organizations, but our brand message needs to reflect who we are and why our culture is a good fit for talent to come in. So now is the perfect time to be having this conversation. I think it's a conversation that's overdue. And I think sometimes it's the last thing that we think about is how we leverage our brand stories.
It's so important when you talk about your, connecting your storytelling to your brand, back to your customer. And a lot of that can be based on emotion, right? And drawing that out. Based on your experience, how does a strong brand story contribute to building loyalty and customer trust?
I think that the conversation about loyalty and trust is interesting. And this is something that came up earlier this week in a really interesting way. We were going through a boot camp that we run businesses through, where we have conversations about developing brand story. And one of the questions that we ask is, if there was an Uber coming and you had 20 seconds to tell me who you are, what you do, and why I should care, could you do it in 20 seconds before the Uber arrived? And what we found was there were 8 people in the call. We were doing this boot camp virtually. We've done them in person and virtually, but this one was virtual. And on that call, we got 8 different answers. And what happens is if there's 8 different answers just in the room on a leadership team, then that means that there's 8 different versions of your brand story floating around, which is going to take longer to build trust. Then you layer on top of that. If I meet you in person and I hear one version of the story, but then I go to your website and I hear another version, and then I meet you on social media and there's another version and they're not aligned, all you're doing is creating barriers to trust. And so we really see brand story as the foundation to all the marketing any business is going to do, for-profit, nonprofit, whatever that looks like. You have to have that brand story in place and aligned to create a good foundation for the work you're going to do and the money you're going to spend.
I think this is probably such an important question right now at this moment in time that we're in, because ultimately your brand is about trust, and that is through storytelling. Your brand is a promise to deliver something of value. And if you're not doing that on a consistent business basis, that's huge. When done right, uh, people will pay more and go out of their way to buy brands that they love. And I find it remarkable how many consumers will confess their love for brands. You and I worked on a brand that had a very passionate fan base, which was cars, right? And when we look at this year, there are so many passionate fans out there with the Barbie Mattel movie, Beyonce, and we can't not mention the Time Person of the Year, Taylor Swift, right? Can you even put a price tag on that loyalty and trust?
You can't. And what happens? So take Taylor Swift as an example. She's used marketing, social media, her presence on stage, obviously, but a lot of other marketing tools to let people know who she is. And she has created a really authentic brand persona for herself. And I think that conversation about authenticity is really important. It's probably going to come up multiple times today. Is brands need to show who they authentically are. And one of the things that happens is, as a brand, you have who you are today and who you want to become aspirationally. And sometimes those are really close together, and sometimes there's a really big gap between the two. And there are brands who want to just really focus on who they want to be aspirationally, but they don't have authentic evidence to back it up. So they'll talk about their core values, or they'll talk about the things that differentiate them, but they don't have any stories to tell to back it up. And so as we're working with clients and they're talking about what their core values are and their differentiators and their brand promises, we're constantly coming back to show us some evidence of that. Who in the room can tell us a story that backs up what you just said? Because that's where authenticity lives. And authenticity is really all those examples that you shared. They all start with some level of authenticity. We want to connect, but we can only connect when we trust the person or the brand that we're connecting with, and we feel like they're coming to us authentically.
And so you bring up a good point. If they don't have those stories, then what do you do?
Then it's like, take this as a core value. From the core value side, if somebody says this is one of our core values and there's no story to back it up, we don't talk about it. We just take it off the table.
Good point.
There has to be evidence of these things. You have to have stories to back it up, to make it real. And if you don't, they're probably wishes and not actual values. They're probably wishes and not actual differentiators. And you can't build your marketing on wishes.
Love it. Can you share how businesses can identify and articulate their unique value proposition through storytelling? Because I think this is a great segue to this question.
One of the things that we do a lot with clients, and this is a really important piece of this, is we'll go through these boot camps that we lead teams through, and we'll ask them, what do you think differentiates you in the marketplace? And they'll come up with their answers. But alongside that, before we ever have these conversations, we actually do work with surveys where we go out and we ask customers and vendors and partners that they're working with what differentiates them. And the point of that is this: we have emotional connections to our brands and the places that we work. So some of the things that we want to say differentiate us, there's not actually evidence of it. And sometimes, again, going back to that evidence conversation, if there's not evidence, is it actually real? So by going out and asking customers what they think of us, by asking customers what they feel differentiates us in the marketplace, we're able to get data. And a lot of times it's conversational data that isn't necessarily based on numbers or metrics, but feelings. Customers buy on feelings in a lot of cases. So we want to hear how they feel about our brand. And we want to get that outside feedback and pull that in so that we can back up what we think internally about who we are and what differentiates us in the marketplace.
Yeah, I love this stat out there is that, consumers buy emotionally and then they justify their decisions rationally, right? 95% of purchases are made through emotion. Right. And so it is a big deal to tap into why people are buying. And I've also heard that, if you're just starting out and you don't have a big customer base, you can also tap into your vendors as well as another option to get that feedback. I love that recommendation. And people start writing these notes down, because these are great tips here that John's giving in terms of tools and tips that you can do to find that unique value proposition. I think a big question out there is, so what are some common mistakes that we can avoid in storytelling? And what are the common mistakes, and how can we avoid them?
I think one of the most common mistakes is building our brand story internally and not asking those outside questions. I think that's a big one. Is we don't ask for that outside feedback. So we're guessing at what our value prop is. I mean, we all, as a brand, if you own a brand, you lead in a brand, you have a pretty good idea. But until we ask those outside questions, I think we're only guessing. And I think one of the other pieces, and we hit on this a little bit earlier, is the authenticity piece. I think when you try and position yourself as something you're not, and we all know brands who have done that. We can all think of a few off the top of our head where they position themselves as one thing, and then when we had an experience with them, it didn't back up what they said. I think those are the two biggest keys. You have to be authentic, and you have to take the emotion out of the conversation. These are, when we start talking about who we are as a brand, they can be emotional conversations because we pour a lot of heart and soul into the work that we do. Being able to remove that and step back a little bit, I think, is a big deal. The other thing I'm going to throw in here, and it ties back to the title of this conversation, is beyond buzzwords. Buzzwords and jargon, we all have them in our business, right? And the problem with that is the jargon we use within our business is industry jargon, which means that everybody in our industry is using the exact same words to tell their story, which means we all sound exactly the same. Nobody stands out as far as their brand story goes because we're all so tied to the buzzwords and the jargon. And I can't tell you the number of times where I've walked into an organization and seen a mission statement on the wall, and there's nothing in that mission statement, because it's packed with buzzwords and jargon. There's nothing in there that would make me want to emotionally connect with the brand. It's not memorable for me. It's not memorable for their teams. And I guarantee it's not memorable for their customers. So simplifying how you tell your story, peeling out the buzzwords and the jargon, and getting to things that people can emotionally connect with. They buy based on feelings. The last thing you bought, bought based on the feeling it was going to give you when you got it home, whether it was a product or a service. So connecting with that is key.
There are two things that you mentioned that I think were just dead on. Negativity. I think everybody, if you've had an interaction with a brand that was negative, you remember that, and you will do anything to avoid that brand and run to another brand to have a good experience, because that pain, whether it's customer service or whatever, that was just so painful. You don't want to do that. You want a brand that just makes it so easy for you. And so to be able to do that, to make your communication and your messaging and how you deliver that so easy for the consumer, I think you hit on that so well. And then those buzzwords, I can't tell you how many times I've come into a company where it's so ingrained into their culture for 20, 30, 50 years that they just believe that everybody out there knows those words. And you go in, you go, I have no idea what this means. And they use it all the time out there. And you're like, do the consumers know what this means? And so you've got to have a fresh perspective to say, what does this mean? Can we relook at how we're communicating our story?
Well, and in a lot of those cases, what you hit on at the end there, the consumer doesn't know what the buzzwords mean or the jargon. The number of times when people will start to throw out acronyms, assuming that everyone knows what the acronym means, we have to simplify. And I've heard it put this way: like when we talk about simplifying our message, we take it from like a 10 to an 8. And really what we want to do is get it from like a 10 to a 3 or a 4. You want to simplify it. And I'm not saying dumb it down. I don't like that positioning. Like we're going to dumb it down because we think our clients can't handle it or our customers. But you want to simplify it. You want to use words that they're going to be able to connect with to tell your story. And too often We use too many words. And again, those words don't tell stories. Like, you're going to connect better through storytelling than through jargon, and convince me through storytelling. And one of the ways that you can do the storytelling is through testimonials. Sometimes we get stuck on, we're going to tell you how awesome we are as a brand, when the true power is in that social proof of somebody who's experienced the brand and has had that experience and can share their version of it. And I think that's another thing that brands can focus on, is the testimonial and social proof side.
Yeah. And then I think you said too much information coming at you. I'm going to make a confession here, right here. I have broken the cardinal rule of too many messages coming at you. When you've got something that's really powerful and unique and so many unique features, I at one point just threw it all in and threw it into the storytelling. And consumers take, and this is probably not 20 seconds or less maybe to make a purchase decision. And when you've got so much coming at you, it overloads them, and then they blank out. And that was a costly mistake. And, what you're saying here is like a masterclass of what to do and what not to do on storytelling. And, you don't want to make the mistake I made of too much coming at somebody. And then you've lost them. You've lost that consumer.
Well, I'm going to bounce the other direction with that as well for a second. You also don't want to make the mistake of only having one message. Because that's the other thing that we see. Like, if you think about your brand, you probably have 2 or 3 customer personas, maybe more, that you're trying to communicate with. One brand message is not going to communicate with everybody. So you can't do this work and say, well, we created one message and we're just going to hit everybody with this one message. If your goal with a brand message is true to form, you're really trying to create those moments where customers feel heard and seen and understood. And that means you're going to understand that customer persona's pains and their challenges. It means you're going to understand their goals and their aspirations. And then you're going to tailor messages to those things. One message, if you have 3 personas, is not going to enable you to do that. You need to have some targeted messages. Have your top level. Here's who we are. Here's what we do. And here's why you should care. But then take it a second level down and say, based on who you are as a persona, here's how that applies to you. And here's how we can make your life better.
Oh, and I love that. I'm going to get right back to that, but we got a question. Do you have any, and this is from Work It Daily, do you have any quick tests to know if your brand message is too complex? And what are the signs? Which is great, because I think we've all been in this situation.
This happened to me yesterday working with a team where we asked that Uber question. Do that. Can you explain in 20 or 30 seconds who you are as a brand? And most brands struggle to do this. And there were 2 guys on that call yesterday who both lead sales, different parts of sales within the organization. And they talked about what a challenge it was for them to tell the story. If you can't tell the story internally in 20 or 30 seconds, I guarantee you your customer doesn't understand it on the other side. That's one of the key tests. And it's a hard test. It's hard for brands to share their story that fast. But with all the noise in the system right now, you have to be able to do that. You want a litmus test to see if you're doing well. From our perspective, that's it. You can add a lot of things behind that 20 or 30 seconds that continue to strengthen it and lift up the brand story. But that initial 20 or 30 seconds you have to connect is gold, and you have to make the most of it.
So thank you for that. I want to go back to when you were talking about the brand story and how to target the different demographics and the buyer personas. How do you begin to do that? And how do you effectively go at each of the messages? How do you start to build that? And when you work with clients, how do you approach that?
We have a series of questions that we ask as we're developing buyer personas, and we keep it relatively simple. We start with demographic, let's get high level demographic, who they are and what they look like. Truth be told, we don't get too deep on that. I don't need to know if it's 3.5 people in your house and there's a fence outside and you have 2.5 dogs. I'm less concerned about that. We build a really simple picture of who the customer persona is. Then we get into the psychographics, what are their driving forces? What are the pains and aspirations that they're trying to deal with? What are some of the goals that they want to achieve? What are some of the struggles that they're facing? We spend a lot of time in that area. Then we lean into the products and services that the business offers. And one of the interesting things about products and services is, I think, when we ask businesses, give us a list of the products and services you offer, immediately we want to make like a bullet point list of all the stuff, which is fine. Like, you should understand your offerings from that perspective. But I like to tell the story of, so I've got twin 17-year-olds at home. And if they have friends over and we're ordering pizza to the house when they've got 4 friends over, pizza is the product or service that shows up at the door. But what I'm really buying is not pizza. I'm buying 6 happy kids who aren't going to destroy my house. And I think I would say the same thing. Take a B2B service company. You're buying a product or a service from a B2B service company, but really what you're buying is confidence. You're buying peace of mind, like those emotions that are tied to it, those experiences you feel like you're going to gain by getting that product or service. We spend a lot of time in that section, specifically tying the product or service to the persona and what they're going to get, how it's going to solve their problems. And then the last piece is we have a big conversation about barriers to entry. What's holding them back? And that, again, these are emotional decisions that customers and clients are making to choose your brand. Let's dive in and have some conversations and understand what's holding them back, because that's a part that gets missed. You can tell your story really well, but if you don't understand some of those barriers and you're not addressing those, that customer or prospect is still going to be stuck. So,
and I think you hit on some great points in terms of what's the result, what's the emotional and the payoff at the end of the rainbow, right? Because those are the stories that come to life, and then you're right. People forget about those barriers. There are so many barriers that have been preventing companies and brands from moving forward and unlocking their keys to success. And that's so important. What is stopping you from making it happen? That's such an important point. So tell me, with the rise of social media right now, what is influencing the ways that businesses approach and share their brand stories? How can they take advantage of that?
I think a couple of things. I think understanding the platforms that people are on. One of the things we hear in social media all the time is like, how do we address all the platforms? And our answer in a lot of cases is you don't have to address all the platforms. You want to go where your customers are at, where are they spending time, and spend your effort there where they're already spending time. But then the beauty of social media is it's a perfect tool for sharing those stories. And a lot of the conversations we're having right now with clients are, how can you use video to do that? There's all kinds of opportunities. You can write blogs. There's all kinds of content that you can share online, but that video content is so powerful. And to be able to put a face to the story, whether it's internal conversations. I've got a client in Louisiana who does executive and team coaching, and we record videos together where they talk about challenges and issues that their clients are facing. And we put a face to those stories, and it becomes really engaging content. Sometimes it's content of leaders sharing thought leader pieces that show up online. That video opportunity that exists now that didn't exist 5 years ago, 10 years ago, at least not as easily accessible as it is today, is something that everybody should be taking advantage of.
And it goes back to what you were talking about earlier, is that authenticity. That's where that comes through, right? And the testimonials and the success stories, and that's where the true brand can come through.
And alongside the authenticity, where it fits, a little bit of vulnerability. I think vulnerability can be overdone. I think there's moments where you should be vulnerable and share the journey and share what it's like to be in your business and do what you do. But there are also spots where you should probably hold back a little bit on the vulnerability. You don't have to share everything. The key to the vulnerability is it does make you more accessible, more trustworthy. It allows somebody to create a connection with you that they can't get otherwise. And again, I think video is a fantastic way to do this. Like exactly what we're doing right now. People get to meet us because they're joining us in this conversation.
Yeah. Work Daily has another question here. So why do some company brands stay relevant and catapult forward while others fade away?
I think for us, and this is one of the things that I wanted to bring up, I think companies that stay relevant are the ones who take this work seriously. I think it was really easy to get down in the weeds and do all the work that we need to do to run our businesses and not invest time in conversations like this, where we're going to talk about our brand message. It ends up being last on the list. And often marketing ends up being one of the first things that gets pulled when things get challenging, which is a massive mistake and loss. The environment we're in right now, where the marketplace is shifting pretty rapidly, and people have this innate fear, like maybe I should pull back on my marketing dollars. The noise is getting quiet right now. There's an opportunity here to share your story in a little bit more quiet environment than existed before. So I think the relevant brands are the ones that take this storytelling piece seriously. And if you're starting to fade a little bit, I think it's time to double down on storytelling. Share who you are.
So it brings me to another question. When we talk about marketing kind of being the first to cut. So how can brands take a look or companies take a look at the measuring the effectiveness of storytelling to then justify, their efforts behind this?
I think one of those examples with our clients who are doing storytelling using video on social media as an example, the ones who are using the video to tell stories, we can see the numbers with engagement. Like the metrics show that the posts that they're putting up that include storytelling are the ones that get the most attention. And really, there's the old term, we want people to pay attention. That's the environment we're in right now. People are paying us attention. They are giving us their time in return for something that we're sharing with them. So as prospects are watching your content online, whether it's a YouTube video, something like this that we're doing today, or social content, they're paying attention. They're giving you their time in return for something that you're going to give them back. And I think you can see the metrics and the data that comes with really good storytelling. That storytelling outperforms a lot of other kinds of content on social media. And I would say you can see the same thing with website content. Really good blog posts that have good storytelling often perform really well. So a lot of it comes back to the typical things we're talking about. The metrics are there and you can see what performs better and what doesn't. And there's opportunities to double down on things like storytelling to grow.
Yeah. So Michael Willis, I want to bring up Michael Willis. He's got a great question here. Why do some brands remain unforgettable while others fade away?
I think about when people, I'm going to go back to the storytelling and not to beat a dead horse here, but think about the conversations you've had that are the most impactful for you and the ones that stick the most in your mind. The ones you remember the most vividly are the ones where somebody told a story and they got you right to the edge of your seat and you're like, I wonder what's going to happen. I can't believe that happened. Those are the ones. Storytelling has been part of the narrative forever. Like the Egyptians wrote stories on the pyramids. Like this is part of who we are as people. This is why storytelling works. We're naturally geared to want to hear stories. And so I think that the storytelling aspect of this is really important. And I think that's where, as brands are looking for ways to accelerate their connection with prospects and customers, that's the one spot we tell everybody to go.
Yeah, I love that. I always love a good success story. It's my favorite. So can you share a successful rebranding story and how storytelling has impacted the process of that?
Absolutely. We have a company here in Minneapolis in the Twin Cities. It's a regional bank that has multiple locations. And one of the things that we have found, we did a rebrand for them. We spent time talking to customers and time exploring what the brand personality was, time looking for evidence of that rebranding, that personality, like in action, right? And one of the things that came out of that was there were stories with customers where we got to sit down and we got to talk to customers and have conversations with customers. Some of them in the business community, some of them on the personal side, some of them in agriculture. Those stories are what drove the rebrand. We got to hear from customers, and we've been able to use some of those customer stories in the marketing side as well to drive the social proof, like I talked about earlier, and also just to make the brand authentic. Like the stories are the glue that holds it all together.
Yeah. And so as we kind of wrap this, oh, here's another one here from Celine Tan. What are some qualities that make storytelling so compelling?
I think you want it to be authentic. It has to be authentic. It has to be real. Sometimes that means getting a little bit dirty. Sometimes that means showing off some skin knees. And sometimes it means, I'll give an example of this. I was at a nonprofit luncheon a couple of weeks ago, and they were doing a fundraising ask, a big give for their organization. They work in the mental health space. And one of the things that came out of that was they had 3 people come up who have been on the receiving end of the mental health services that they provide. If they had done the ask for that event without those 3 stories, the ask doesn't go as well. I guarantee it doesn't go as well. But once you shared the stories and they created an emotional connection between all the people sitting in this room, sharing lunch and sharing this time together, and those 3 stories, watching the fundraising happen after that was amazing. It wouldn't have happened the way it did without the stories and without the connections, the emotional connection that the 3 women who shared their stories created in that room. And so that's, I think, the key. It has to grab you emotionally.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. What, I always love to give some practical takeaways to enhance brand storytelling for the audience today. Can you give us like 1 to 2 actionable tips that they can start implementing right away?
Absolutely. I think the first actionable tip is grab your calendar and grab your team and set some time aside to have conversations about this. Like we said in the beginning, a lot of things have changed in businesses over the last 3 years, and they're going to continue to change. This needs to be an ongoing conversation you're having with your team. What's our story today? What do we want it to become, obviously, but what is it today, and what are we trying to communicate with our customers? Have our customers changed? If they have their needs and their wants changed? We have to address that. The only way to do that is to put time on the calendar and invest the time to do this. And I think that's the first. It sounds super simple, right? That's the first thing. And it is easy in theory, but nobody does it. So to put the time on the calendar is the first thing. And then start asking the right questions. Like one of the easy questions we ask in the beginning of our boot camps is, give us 3 words we would use to describe the brand. And again, seems super simple, but if you get a group of people putting together the brand vocabulary, starting with like just single words, now you're starting to build out how you're going to tell that story. You ask that same question of customers. I think actionable, ask your customers what they think of you. Do a survey and get their feedback. Those are the big ones right out of the gate.
Oh, I love that. John, where can people find you and your company? Because this has been amazing if they want to reach out.
Yeah, if you're curious, you can find OrangeBall at orangeballcreative.com, all one word. And you can find me if you want to email me. I've got some tools I can send you to help walk you through some storytelling. If you want to do a DIY version of this, I'll send you some tools. You can reach me at John, JOHN, at orangeballcreative.com.
Everyone, please reach out to John. Tell him that you saw him here on Marketing Table Talk. He's, as you can see, has a wealth of information and suggestions for how to craft a compelling brand story. John, thank you so much for being a guest here today. And everybody, thank you for joining John and I. I hope to see you on the next episode of Marketing Table Talk, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.